positivity with those around you. You proclaim loudly, behold, team, it does not have to be this way. We don't have to be this way. I've learned a new way. Together we can change. And suddenly your world implodes as the responses rush towards you. No way, we like it this way, but we've always done it like this. Sorry, man, just not gonna happen. Good morning, folks, and welcome to today's webinar, live from, a not so sunny Durban. I think we're getting the first taste of winter here in Durban. The temperature's plummeted to about 22 degrees. It's insane. But as Charles said, my name is Roger Collins, and I'm quite honored today to share with you my insights into 3 topics that are probably the biggest challenges for institutions today. And thanks for that, Charles, for taking the 3 biggest challenges we have and rolling them into one webinar. So there's a lot of content that's going to happen today. Please feel free to take notes along the way. If you have questions, you're welcome to ask them. You can drop them in the chat box as well, right after you've filled in that Google form, because if you haven't filled in the form, then this never happened. You were never here, and all of this was just a dream. Developing your leadership skills has arguably never been more urgent. Managing organizations in an uncertain world requires us to consistently re-examine our perceptions and look at situations from different perspectives. We need to effectively lead out change more than ever before. And I think change is where we'll start today. So I want to set a barometer, and I want you to type one word in the chat box that describes how you feel about change. So think about that for a moment. And what is that one word that comes to mind that describes how you best feel about change? And let's see what we get in the chat box there. Uncertain. Nice. We should be getting about 50. Challenging. How do you feel about change? When something at work changes, when something in your life changes, when you have to change, what is that one feeling that you get? Opportunity, there's some positivity. Exciting, good, nice words coming out here. So we're building up a mix on that spectrum of uncertainty, that feeling of you don't know if you want to go down that road, to exciting, good opportunities out there. So these are all the feelings we experience when we think about change. In 2005, the education department rolled out something called OBE. It was outcomes-based education. And it was a radical change to the way teaching and learning occurred. I use the phrase rolled out on purpose because it was literally steamrolled through our schools, and they hammered strategy, policy, rules, procedures in meeting after long passive-aggressive meeting. Leadership was intent on forcing a change in behavior. And at the time, I was a science teacher. And as a science teacher, I understood very well that whenever you apply a force, there is going to be resistance. And the whole process was probably about as successful as my forays in the kitchen. When they're asked to embrace some form of change or transformation, most organizations tend to pay far more attention to strategy and execution than they do to what people are feeling and thinking. Now, resistance, especially if it's passive, invisible, and unconscious, can derail even the best strategy. And let me tell you, the resistance from teachers was unyielding. Their response was pretty much a textbook chapter on human change behavior. And there were a number of ways that teachers reacted to this change in policy. There were those who just flat out refused to embrace any change to the way they taught. I was taught like this. My dad was taught like this. My dad's dad before him, and it didn't do us any harm. Then you had those who kind of did it, but still used the old approach just to make sure. There were those who quietly avoided it, hoping that it would kind of go away. Then you had those who begrudgingly did it, but all the while they were waiting for it to fail so they could be the ones who stood up and said, "I told you so." And then we had a very small number of teachers who were those who did it, ran with it, and fought desperately to champion the cause. And you may recognize some of those feelings in yourself when it comes to change. Now, the response from management was straight out of the next chapter of human change management behavior. You see, they took the resistance personally. They got defensive. They got aggressive. They blamed the teachers and the students. Some of them were even experiencing the same feelings as the teachers, and they tended to blame government. They blamed the Department of Education. And all the while, they doubled down on changing the behavior of those who resisted. They wielded this accountability as their weapon of choice. And this emphasis on accountability, especially in the modern times, has brought with it mountains of red tape. I personally think the way we wield accountability is dangerous because it kills creativity in a world where creativity is key. It forces us to shy away from experimentation, and it can erode trust. Accountability is not a weapon that we should be yielding. Accountability is something that we need to give to people. In psychology, there is a very real phenomenon that you may have heard of. It's called the fundamental attribution error. And it works like this. We see the behavior of others as a reflection on their character. And this was the response of management. The behavior of the teachers, the response and the resistance of the teachers was a reflection of the type of people they were. But we also have, when we look at ourselves, we see our behavior rather as a result of the situation we find ourselves in. And this was the behavior of the teachers. They were attributing their behavior and their resistance not to who they were, but they were attributing that behavior to the situation they found themselves in. And this creates a tug of war. On the one side, you've got people blaming the character and personality of others. And on the other side, you've got those people blaming the situation they find themselves in. And all of this sounded the death knell in 2012 of OBE. And the department announced the introduction of CAPS, the National Curriculum and Assessment Policy Statement, which is where we are right now in the education field. And I think the jury is still very much out on that. Now, no one realized at the time that managing change, it's not an intellectual endeavor. It's not an endeavor that we need to drive by policy and procedure, because managing change is largely an emotional endeavor. It's about shifting the way people think, the way people feel, encouraging them to challenge their perspective. Resistant behavior is actually not the problem here. We need to discover the underlying condition of that behavior. And managing change starts with understanding how other people see change. And there are 5 key points here when we talk about managing change. It's about understanding, how is that change going to affect those around me? How is the change going to impact on those around me? And how are they going to see that change? And something we often forget when we are implementing some form of change is we don't realize what the impact of that change is going to have on other people. It may not be this minor disruption that it is to us, or the minor disruption that we feel it is. They may not understand that change clearly. Oftentimes when it comes to change, and we saw some of these responses now, people are scared, people are angry, and sometimes people feel betrayed by that change. Maybe they feel that this decision has been made about them, but entirely without them, without engaging them and bringing them on that journey. And maybe they feel that they're not good enough to implement that change. This can lead to what we call imposter syndrome. Maybe it's not a minor disruption. Maybe they don't understand that change clearly. Maybe they are scared. Maybe they're betrayed. Maybe they feel you've made these decisions without them. Maybe they feel they're not good enough. And then finally, maybe they are just that person who will not accept change. We know that change needs to happen, but oftentimes we don't know how to go about delivering that change. Where do we start? Who do we involve in that change? And how do we see it through to the end? And there are certain key points to follow here. Sometimes you need to adopt all of these. Sometimes it's a mix of these key points. The first thing to do is to create an urgency around that change and get people to understand why is that change necessary. And this is one of the mistakes the Department of Education made, is they brought in this new policy, this radical change to the way teachers understood teaching and learning. But at no point did they actually explain why this change was necessary. You know, as teachers, we didn't understand. We had always done it this way. It's always worked. Why do we need to do it differently? It's about creating an urgency in your messaging and ensuring that the people know why this change is necessary. The other thing to do is to look at forming a coalition. In any form of change, we have what's called the law of diffusion. And it goes like this. In any change, there are always those who implemented the change and know why it's happening. And you have the early adopters in that change. Those are those people who jump on board and run with it, trying to champion the cause. It's important that if you are implementing change, if you are managing change, find those early adopters, because it's a very small percentage. Get them on your side, get them to start driving that messaging to the rest of the team. And slowly, that understanding begins to diffuse through the population. And you'll get a kind of a bell curve where more and more people start to accept the change and drive that change. And you get that shift. It's about forming that coalition, that team of people who will help transform that organization or drive that agenda. The other thing you need to do is to create a shared vision for change. Clearly communicate that vision. One of the words that was used earlier on was uncertainty. And during times of uncertainty, people experiencing change want a clear view of the path ahead. It was one of the biggest challenges during the pandemic when it came to looking at changing the way we do business. This platform we're working on now, 2 years ago, it wasn't really a thing in most businesses. Now, this is what we do. In the beginning, there was resistance to this way of communicating over a computer screen. People experience change, want a clear view of the path ahead. It's important that you share what you know, including what's changing, when it's changing, and how it's going to change. But for the most change initiative, it's helpful to start with a narrative. Use a story that clearly articulates the big picture. One of the most important questions you want to answer during this process is, how are the changes you make today helping you achieve the vision for tomorrow? How are these changes helping us achieve our vision for tomorrow? Look for the obstacles that are going to form barriers to that change. Remove those obstacles or mitigate them. Create short-term wins for your team. Give them short-term goals, short-term targets that they can achieve and celebrate along the way. And continually build on that change. Remove the obstacles, create short-term wins, and build on that change. And then anchor your changes in your institution's culture. Institutions up to today have not been anchored in change culture. It's about driving the status quo. It's always been about driving the status quo. Management and leadership have been about putting people in positions of power whose job it is to ensure that things work the way they always have. And this is not the way the new world works. We live in very uncertain times, and we need to anchor changes in our institution's culture. We need to ensure that our teams are ready to accept change, ready to drive change. It needs to become part of our business narrative. And then finally, continually coach your team through the change process and beyond it, because change communication is never a one-on-one done event. Keeping employees informed is something that you will have to do throughout every step of the change process. Studies have found that continual communication is the leading factor in transformational success. And when you're thinking about how to communicate change, keep 3 things in mind. Be clear and consistent in your communication. Don't create confusion. Understand that you will not have all the answers. If you don't know, say it. I do not know. And don't forget to articulate to your team what's in it for them. Because let's be honest, as human beings, that's what we're always looking for. What is in it for me? What do I get out of this process? And if you can drive that messaging, the change management process becomes a lot easier. So to look again very briefly at those points, create an urgency. Make sure your team understand why the change is necessary. Change for change's sake is not going to win the battle. Form that powerful coalition. Get your early adopters on board. Get them to help you drive that change messaging. Create a shared vision for change and communicate that vision clearly. Remove obstacles, create short-term wins, build on that change and anchor the changes in your institution's culture. And then finally, continually coach through the change process and beyond. It's not a one-off event. The belief that people hate change is, I think, quite damaging, and it's just plain false. People want change. Bored people want change. Frustrated people want change. Passionate people want change. Irritable and cynical people want change. And actually, if you went out there and ran the survey, the number of people who want change is much, much greater than we imagine. It's just not true that we fear change. What we do fear is sudden change. It's change that is thrust upon us. This is the thing that needs to be managed more than anything else. It's not so much the change, it's that sudden change. Failure to successfully implement change can hurt employee morale, and it breeds cynicism. This is exactly what happened with teachers. They became very cynical in that change process. They fought tooth and nail against it, and morale dropped. It also makes employees less committed to the next great organizational initiative that you may want to drive. If you fail in communicating and driving change effectively now, you're going to struggle more so in the future. The thing to remember is change can be happy and exciting, but it can also be messy and complicated. And if evolution has taught us anything, is that change is necessary for survival. A fundamental human need is to contribute. It's to make a difference. And for me, you can keep things the same or you can make a difference. You cannot do both. Organizational transformation requires us to make a shift in our assumption. Modern business is very different from business 10, 15, 20 years ago. There is a drive in the modern world to shift from a profit focus to a purpose focus. That's what people want to know they're working towards. It's about shifting from hierarchies to networks, from controlling management and leadership systems to empowering employees to make a difference. It's about plans and structures to experimentation, and shifting from this privacy and secrecy to an era of transparency. Innovation is a word that we throw around a lot. Innovation is thrown around so much that I think it's beginning to lose its meaning. It's becoming a cliche. We've used it so often on our journey at Newbridge College, this idea of we're innovative. But when you use that narrative, the problem with it is we talk about innovation as if it's this big, mythical and magical thing. And I think there's a danger in that, because when you put across that message that innovation and change is this magical thing, it makes the task oftentimes look insurmountable. But that's not what innovation is. Innovation is just about doing something that hasn't been done before, or doing something in a different context. It can be as simple as that. And that small change can drive a big initiative. You all know the story of the frog in boiling water. Yes? The story that says, and I mean, I remember learning about the story when I was studying psychology back in the day. If you take a frog and put him in cold water and you slowly heat up the water, he becomes very comfortable with that along the way. And eventually the water gets so hot that he boils to death. Now, it turns out that this story of the frog in boiling water is actually just not true. The frog actually jumps out of the water every single time. When the water becomes uncomfortable, the frog jumps out the water. You see, it's not frogs that fail to evaluate. It's actually us, human beings. And Socrates understood this secret to change more than 2,000 years ago when he said, focus your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. And that's what change management is about. It's about focusing your energy not on fighting the old system, but on building that new system. And if you want to effectively lead change, you need to put people first by focusing on uncovering their resistance. Don't focus on overcoming that resistance. And this, folks, is how we lead change in the modern world. And I'm going to pause there for a moment. Do we have any questions? Any comments you want to make at this point about managing change in your organization? Has anyone managed some big change in their organizations recently? What challenges did you face? What insights have you learned? Gabby, are you making a comment there? I can see you talking, but your mic's on mute. I think Gabby's using sign language.
Sorry, we both in the same office, so we don't want it to. Okay, so we've had quite a few challenges. We've got a new general manager, we've got a new committee, we've got a new captain. So there are lots of new changes at Rand Park.
Okay, and those challenges, are you finding managing them becoming easier? Some of the insights that I've shared today, are those going to be useful to take on board? What are the things you would highlight about what I've said today about change that you could take on board to drive that initiative?
Yeah, we have to do things slowly and we have to find our feet, obviously. Our general manager has big shoes to fill, so we obviously all behind him and we're assisting him as best we can. And yeah, I'm sure we'll do great. We just need maybe a few more, 1 or 2 more months to get going.
Now, Gabby, you actually made a point there that I want to go back to. Gabby made the point, and she said that they need to understand that driving this change is a slow process. It takes time, and I think that is a very important point to make, because so often in our narrative, when we talk about change, and this was something that happened back when I was teaching, we drive this message in a way that it makes people feel that they have to change tomorrow and they have to come out and do things differently and be great at it the next day. And we did this with teaching. You need to teach differently. You need to approach teaching and learning in a new way. And the feeling, the way the message was driven to the teachers was that you've got to get up tomorrow morning, step up in front of that class and be an entirely new type of educator. And there's a problem with that narrative, because that's not how change works. Because what that drives is fear. It drives that idea that I'm not good enough to do this change. And it's not about becoming good tomorrow. It's not about we have to change and be different in 24 hours. It's about understanding that we are evolving towards that process. It's having that vision in mind, knowing the goal that you want to achieve and slowly driving towards it, experimenting, testing those things that work and those things that don't work. And I think that's an incredibly important point. People need time to adapt to these changes. And like I made the analogy just now with evolution, evolution is necessary for the survival of species, but it doesn't happen tomorrow. It's a very slow adaptation to the changing environment around us. And I think that is a key message to leave you with on this point of managing change. Make sure that we don't drive that narrative that it has to happen now. It has to happen tomorrow. We've got to be new, better, different, and the best at what we do, because that does create anxiety. It creates stress, and it's a barrier to the way that change is going to be driven. Charles, did you want to say something?
Yeah, there's a comment there in the chat box as well from Lens. He says new management, resistance to modernization overall, questioning of knowledge and skills due to age.
Absolutely. So if I understand that correctly, you're saying that age can play a very important role in the way change is handled. And again, I will use that analogy with teaching, because teaching is one of those environments where the whole change behavior and change management behavior is highlighted so perfectly. Like I said earlier, it's a textbook example of change resistance and change management and the challenges that are faced. And you will find that generally the older people are, yes, it's you old guys out there, but generally the older people are, the more resistant they are to change. And there's a simple reason for that. It's because we become comfortable in what we do. Teachers who have taught for 20 or 30 years, that is what they do. That is what has always worked for them. Why do I want to change now? Why do I want to go back to what it was like when I was a first-year teacher, relearning the tricks and tools of the trade? And it's something that, as an older generation, and it's something that I've struggled with. When we launched Newbridge College 4 years ago, you know, I was very lucky in my journey. Along the way, I've always been in a situation where I've had a large amount of autonomy. You know, when I started teaching back in those days, as a teacher, you had absolute autonomy. That classroom was your kingdom. No one interfered and no one told you how to do what you needed to do. You were free to experiment and make it happen. I moved from there into the role as principal of a small private school. And I was handed the reins of the school, and the senior management walked away. I had absolute autonomy on that journey. And so when I moved into higher education, I experienced the same thing. And when we started Newbridge College, it was very different. And one of the things our CEO spoke to me about in the beginning is he said, you need to understand that this journey of building a startup is a roller coaster ride. And I was like, yeah, I'm good with that. Roller coaster ride. And over the last 4 years, I've come to realize something incredibly important that has oftentimes put me in a corner. I am terrified of roller coasters. It's that simple. If I go on a small roller coaster, someone has to hold my hand. And I don't even get in the line for the big roller coaster. You see, the roller coaster analogy was a fun one that was thrown out. But if I had taken a moment to think about it carefully, I would have realized that I needed more support than I thought in this journey, because roller coasters are scary things. And this is what change management is about. It is easier for younger people to undergo change because they're not as rooted in their ideas as the rest of us are. There's a great story I'll share with you quickly. It's a Buddhist parable. And it tells the story of a man who's standing on the bank of a treacherous river. Now, he has to get to the other side. So he quickly builds a raft and he uses it to safely navigate his way across the river. In joyous celebration, he lifts the raft over his head and he begins to walk towards the forest. But as he enters the forest, the raft begins banging into the trees and snagging on the dense foliage. And he only has one chance of survival. He must ditch the very raft that saved his life yesterday, for today it will end up killing him. And the idea there is that the raft represents our outmoded ideas, our outdated ways of doing things. And we need to understand that there is a time that if we want to survive the future, we need to let go of that raft. It may have saved us yesterday. It may have been the thing that worked yesterday. Today, it's the thing that's going to drag us down. So, you know, for those of us who are deeply rooted in the way we do things, there is a time to step back and look at it from a different perspective and understand that to drive that change and to survive, throw away that damn raft. And we move now from that change management to something that follows very closely on the heels of that. And that's the idea of productivity. Now, change management plays a large role in the morale of your team. If you don't manage change properly, you can damage morale. And the thing with morale is Good morale boosts productivity, and productivity can boost morale. It's like what do they call it? A self-perpetuating machine. Morale boosts productivity and productivity boosts morale. In 2010, I was principal of that small private school I spoke about. And our focus back in the day was on small classes. So something that differentiated us from all other schools around at the time was our biggest classes were 12 learners per class. And this reduced teacher administration. It gave them time to focus on lesson preparation and individual attention. It was a defining factor in what we did at that school. The teachers were far less stressed than those in the larger private schools or the state schools, except for my biology teacher. She seemed different. You see, she endlessly complained about overload and late hours. She seemed to be managing a larger workload than all the other teachers. I sat with her, I worked on reducing her duties, freeing up her timetable to ease her burden, to find a way to make her journey easier. But I was walking past her classroom one day, and as I glanced to the side, I was stopped dead in my tracks. Pinned up on her board was the most spectacular, hand-drawn, labeled picture of a human heart. And I thought to myself, yeah, that must have taken hours. And it turns out she had pictures, hand-drawn, labeled, of every organ, flower, and animal skeleton in the syllabus. Now, I'm sure you're sitting there and you can see where this is going. You see, here was a teacher who was confusing a couple of key concepts. Intensity does not equal efficacy. Just because you are doing something with intensity does not mean that it is an effective approach. And more importantly, just because you are busy does not mean you are being productive. And it's something so many of us confuse. We think being busy is productivity. Now, we live in arguably the most stimulating time in human history, but the barrage of information and the pace of change is overwhelming. Think about it. You need to do this. You've got to complete that. You must learn this. Folks, you've got to read that. You've got to answer that WhatsApp now. I want you to respond to this email before close of business. As a species, as a society right now, we are so busy being busy that we just get bugger all done. And productivity means different things to different organizations. What productivity is not is trying to squeeze more tasks out of every spare moment we have. And unfortunately, I see so many businesses driving this narrative. They think that the more they give their teams to do, the more productive they're actually, the more productivity rather they're actually achieving. But instead, true workplace productivity means that everyone can bring their full creativity, insight, and unique mojo to the work that really counts. Productivity is about ensuring that your team can bring their full creativity, their full insight, and their uniqueness to the work that actually counts. You see, the work that actually counts in the classroom is engaging those learners on an individual level. It's not drawing the most spectacular diagram of a heart, because now you can Google that in 4 minutes and print it out. Completing what we set out to achieve and hitting our most important goals. That's what productivity is all about. Completing what we set out to achieve and hitting those most important goals. Think about the last time that you felt highly productive. Just pause on that for a moment. When is the last time you felt highly productive? Now think about what you were actually doing at that time and why did it go so well? What expectations did you and others have of your performance? Now, if you have that picture in mind, the chances are you were most productive when the following 4 things were achieved. when you had a clear objective, a clear goal in mind, when you could concentrate on the task at hand. You were most productive when you had sufficient resources to meet the expectations that were placed on you. And finally, you understood the significance of that task and you worked hard to complete it. And a combination of all these factors lead to what psychologists call flow. And if you think back to that moment when you were most productive, that is a great word to probably describe how you feel. You were in the zone. You were flowing. And on an individual level, productivity is about managing three things. It's about managing your time, managing your attention, and finally, managing your energy. Time, attention, and energy. And it doesn't matter the order you look. In fact, we could switch that around and say time, energy, attention, and make a little anagram out of it. T. Manage your time, manage your energy, and manage your attention. It's about looking at, when you kick off your day, ask yourself, what are the three main things that I want to accomplish today? What are the three main things that I want to accomplish today? And then do one of them at a time. We have this myth in our culture about multitasking, and we talk about it often. We talk about people being good multitaskers. The thing to understand about multitasking is it's wrong. It is a myth. There is no such thing as multitasking. The human brain has not evolved to do multiple tasks at the same time. If you think you're a multitasker, you're not. It's about focusing on that one important task at a time. Now, I have this discussion often with students of mine and lecturers as well. They will say to me, we all multitask every day. I mean, think about it. You drive to work, and while you're driving, you're listening to the radio, you're applying your lipstick, you're talking on the phone, you're doing all these tasks at the same time. This is multitasking. But the thing to understand is it's not multitasking in its true sense. What that is becoming good at something so that you no longer have to think about it. And when you're driving, you don't think about driving. It doesn't take up space in our working memories of our brain. It's an automatic action. This is the only way we can actually multitask in that sense, is to become so good at practiced at something that it becomes second nature. Once it is second nature and we no longer have to think about it, we can then perform other tasks at the same time. But that is not true multitasking. Walking and talking is an action of multitasking. But let's be honest, none of us have to think about the action of walking. And you only have to think about a baby. If any of you have interacted with a young baby who's starting to walk, when a baby's starting to walk, when it's up and going, all you have to do is distract it for a moment, talk to it. And the first thing it does is fall down. Because a baby has to actually concentrate on the action of walking. It hasn't become second nature yet. And when you distract it from that task, it can no longer perform it. If there are 9 rabbits on the ground and you want to catch one, focus on just one. Time, attention, energy. Do one thing at a time. Don't think you're a multitasker. Because if you're doing another task at the same time, you are not doing one of them, or you're not doing either of them properly, so to speak. Cultivate your energy throughout the day as well. Understand that you have so much energy to give and distribute that energy carefully. Manage it throughout the day. And folks, disconnect for some time during the day. And by disconnect, I mean, get off your emails, get off the internet, get off your phones for a moment. 47% of online time is procrastination. Half of the time you are online, you are procrastinating. You are not fulfilling the task that you've undertaken. And finally, take the time to daydream. We often don't do this enough. It's about kicking back for 15, 20 minutes. The value in that daydreaming moment creates or builds creativity in us. It's something I've learned to do in the last few years. is break away from the tasks that I'm doing and daydream. Build some creativity. We all have the same amount of time available to us in the day, 24 hours. We have exactly the same amount of time as Albert Einstein had. Yet look what he achieved. Sure, he may be a little bit smarter than some of us, but one of Albert Einstein's key insights was the time he took to daydream. He had those moments, although he had a full-time job at the time, he took those moments to pause and stare out the window and to ponder the world around him. And that's when he had his greatest insights. That's when he accomplished and was the most productive. Focus on those three main tasks in the day. Do one thing at a time. Cultivate your energy. Disconnect and take the time to daydream. And the thing to distinguish here, or be careful to distinguish between, is pressure and stress. Pressure is an internal or an external force, and it often spurs us on to achieve. Stress, however, happens when pressure becomes too great. Pressure can be good, and in most instances, if we manage pressure correctly, it can motivate us to perform better. Stress, however, by definition, is a bad thing. It's a feeling that we're losing control, and it can be harmful to our productivity, but more importantly, stress is harmful to our health. When you experience the right amount of pressure, and when you work on strategic tasks, you're more likely to enter that state of flow. It helps you concentrate and work without distraction. You can put all of your energy and resources to productive use of your time because you're not fighting stress and you're not torn between competing priorities. Now, if you want to improve workplace productivity as a leader, you have to have a deep understanding of the various factors that can influence performance. It's about taking the time to survey the landscape. Maybe you require some updates to your procedures. Maybe you need to relook at your workplace layout and reassess your employee tools. The ability for employees to meet expectations is pretty much related to two metrics: the quality of the resources that they are provided and the amount of support that they are given. That's it. If you want to boost workplace productivity, focus on those two metrics. What quality resources do my employees have, and what amount of support are they being given? This was highlighted to me the other day. I had to go to the Durban Central Post Office. I don't know how many of you live in Durban, and I don't know how many of you have been to the Durban Central Post Office lately. That's the one that's right next to the City Hall. It's that old building, beautiful building. I had to go and collect something, to my horror, from the Durban City Post Office. And I walked in there. You have no idea. I cannot begin to describe what the post office now looks like. It is devastating. And I can tell you, when you look around and survey that landscape, the quality of resources that those employees are given amounts to almost zero. I went up and the woman asked me to sign a form, and I was looking around for a pen, and she pointed to the desk, and there on the desk, tied with an elastic band, was not a pen, but the inside of a big pen. You know, that thin refill part? That was the pen. That was the quality of the resources that this team is working with. And when you look around that post office, there is zero leadership and zero support being given to those employees. We're all very quick to throw abuse at the post office employees and say that they're incompetent. But the biggest problem is they cannot be truly productive in an environment that has no resources and no support. Now, it's tempting to conclude from all of what I've said that if individuals are able to perform their work much better and faster, overall productivity has to be soaring. The thing is, organizational productivity is not rooted in individual performance. The ultimate, and albeit most difficult, goal to achieve in all of this is to create an organization in which all role players have complete context, tools, and support to focus their time on the business's most important value drivers. And they need to do this without being slowed down by bureaucracy. You see, individual productivity is one thing, but unless all your role players are focusing on the most important value drivers, you're not going to achieve overall organizational productivity. Now, this is exciting, I think, because the actual productivity increases that you will realize at an organizational level, but also because each individual will finally have a clear understanding of what matters and how to succeed. And when individual productivity increases add up to organizational productivity benefits, you will know that you've arrived at this point. Now, there's some basic rules to increase organizational productivity, and they go like this. Number one, make sure everyone has the tools that they need. You cannot be productive if you don't have the tools. Manage effective communications. Figure out what your team's motivation killers are and find out how to remove those motivation killers, or how to at least mitigate them. Resist the temptation to micromanage. And this is a big one. I see this so often in schools that I visit and institutions that I do presentations at, this process of micromanaging. And there's a very simple reason for it. It's the way in which we achieve leadership roles. You see, when we go into a job, we are trained how to do that job. To become a teacher, we go through a 4-year training process. You would not put a teacher in the classroom who was not trained. That teacher becomes good at what they do. We become good at the job we do. And because we're good at our job and we've been there a while, we get promoted. And we get promoted to a management position. And this is where it all goes wrong, because we don't receive training in management. We get put in that position because we used to do a job well. So what we end up doing is we end up managing what we know. Instead of managing the people who are doing the job we used to do, we end up managing the job we used to do. And this is where micromanaging becomes, it removes autonomy from our team, and it can kill motivation. And if your motivation is killed and your morale is low, productivity will drop. Resist that temptation to micromanage. Our role as managers and leaders is to manage the people who are doing the job we used to do. When it comes to meetings, conduct essential meetings only. Have a clear purpose for those meetings. Now, what I'm going to do, I came across a really good article the other day by Stephen Rogelberg. Now, Stephen Rogelberg is a professor who studies meetings. I can't think of anything worse, but this is what he has dedicated his life to. He studies meetings, and he's put together this document on how to run and conduct effective meetings. And there's some great insight in this article. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send that on to Charles, who will forward it on to you for some bedtime reading. And you can have a look at that article and take some important insights out of it when it comes to conducting meetings. Conduct essential meetings. A meeting for the sake of a meeting, and especially in today's world, if we are using meetings purely to disseminate information, we are going to kill team morale, because we can disseminate information in so many other ways, in much better ways. Meetings need to serve a different purpose. Take steps to minimize distractions and develop clear metrics. Your team need to understand what the goals are and what they're trying to achieve, by when and why. And then finally, encourage and support your team to balance their work and life. If you can get those things right, you will not only build individual productivity, but you will start to build that organizational productivity that I spoke about just now. Today, we see everything from books to podcasts and whole research papers, and even the odd webinar that is dedicated to decoding this mystery of productivity. And the thing to understand is that every organization is different. Even within your own organizations, Each of you is different. You have different teams, and every one of those teams is unique as well. They all have different skills, they have different customers, and so on. And you need to work out the best way to measure productivity for your organization and your team. And make sure that you communicate that message clearly with your employees. They need to understand what those metrics are and understand what are the key driving factors to make that organization more effective. It's not always that we need to do more, but it's rather that we need to focus on less to become more productive. Productivity and change management go hand in hand, because if your team is productive and they have that productivity morale and culture in them, managing change going forward also becomes a lot easier. And at that point, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a short break, give you a chance to assimilate all that information. And I do want to remind you at this point, if you haven't already done so, go onto the chat, click on that link to fill in the Google form. Remember, if you don't fill in the Google form, all of this never happened. So make sure every one of your team members out there have completed that Google form. Are there any comments, any questions at this stage before we take a break? Now, I know that many of you are also writing furiously, taking notes and highlighting all these absolutely gold mine of information, but I've also put together a summary highlighting the important points I've made in today's presentation. I will send it on to Charles as well, and he will forward those notes on to you so that you can go through them in your own time and pick up on those main points that I've made this morning in those first two sections, change management and productivity. Any comments? Are we all good?
I just have a question that I want to ask.
Yes. There's a Sean.
I'm Sibo, but from Country Club Johannesburg.
Okay, what would you like to ask?
I just wanted to ask about micromanagement, like to have that fully explanation about micromanagement.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we talk about micromanagement, what we're referring to are leaders or management who end up managing every small task that you have. You know, I worked for someone in the past who, although I was principal of the campus and I had been principal of 3 other campuses before that, as well as principal of a school, every task that I was given was managed right down to the last detail. Things as simple as, you know, will you organize putting up no smoking signs? And then being asked 7 times along that journey whether the no smoking signs were up and how many had been put up. You know, I can put up a no smoking sign. It's a sign. You know, that's something that doesn't have to be managed. What's important to boost employee morale is to have the faith in your employees that you can give them autonomy. I want to be able to say to you, this is your mandate. You have to do this. And then you go and do it. I shouldn't have to keep coming back and saying, have you done that? Have you started this? Have you done it this way or have you done it that way? I spoke earlier about accountability. That idea of we wield accountability as a weapon. If you don't do this, these are the consequences. That's not what accountability is about. Accountability is not something you wield. Accountability is something you give to someone. This is your task. Go forth and make it happen. You need to deal with the failures of that task if it happens. You give people accountability and responsibility for a task, but give them the freedom and the initiative to perform that task. It's so your job as a manager, your job as a leader is to understand your team members, give them the support they need to perform that function, but not tell them how to perform that function every step of the way. You know, and there's that old saying, if you're going to buy a dog, don't bark for it. You know, and that's what we tend to do when we micromanage our employees. It's like buying a dog and then barking for that dog. You buy a dog to bark. Let him do what he does. If you employed someone to do that job, then you must have seen they had the ability to do that job. Support them, don't micromanage them. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Like I say, I mean, this idea of micromanagement is actually, it's a fault in the way we do management and leadership. You know, we don't train it enough. We don't train the right metrics. We don't teach our managers how to communicate effectively. We don't teach our managers how to manage change. We don't teach them how to support employees in their tasks. And because they don't have those skills, they end up managing the very thing they know. And the thing they know is the job that they used to do. And it's human nature. You know, that's why we end up micromanaging, not because there's a fault with us. It's a fault in the system so often. We haven't empowered our managers and leaders to manage and lead in the correct way. Any other comments? Fantastic. Charles, we've got 10 o'clock right now. Should we say 10-minute break? We'll be back at 10:10 to drive the final section this morning. You happy with that?
Perfect, perfect.
Excellent. Folks, go make a cup of coffee. Again, like I always say to the Cape Town people, maybe you grab a glass of wine because you don't drink coffee down there, I believe. But we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Enjoy the break. All right, are we all back and ready to go? Have some thumbs up.
Perfect.
All good. In the book Human Swarm, Mark Moffat comments that there is little in the history of life more remarkable than a human strolling through a coffee shop. You see, the patrons can be utterly unknown to us. And the thing is, nothing happens. We do fine. We stay calm in the face of total strangers. And this fact tells us something rather unique about our species. No other vertebrates can do this. Other species bumping into an unknown individual, let alone a coffee shop full of them, would fight or flee like the damned. If you take 40,000 chimpanzees and throw them in Loftus, you get pandemonium. Take 40,000 human beings, throw us in Loftus, you get the curry cup. You see, we have a talent for dealing with people, and we can move seamlessly in their company. But we're not always like that. Welcome back to the final session, folks. It is part 3 of our session today, and it is about going head-to-head with conflict resolution. I think arguably everyone's favorite topic. So to kick off, we'll set a barometer once again, and we'll type a number in the chat box. What are your feelings about dealing with conflict out of 5? Number 1, bring it on. I love it. All the way up to number 5, I'm not touching that. So what are your feelings about dealing with conflict? On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being bring it on, and 5 being hell no, I'm not touching that. What have we got here? We've got 3s, we've got a 4, we've got 2s. Nice. We'll get some insight from Tim and Hunker and their teams over there. We've got a 3, a 2. Very nice. 2, 3. No one's got a 5. I used to be right up there on the 5. Sure, dealing with conflict. Most people say they don't like conflict. And the thing with conflict to realize is that you don't have to like it to deal with it. They say that it takes 2 to tango. Well, it also takes 2 to have an argument. And unfortunately, conflict is in our very nature. Every day, large or small, human conflicts are all around us. We've got a major one going on right now. But conflict is simply a result of problems being tangled up with the dark side of human nature. And it emerges from an innate protection and competition motivation that we evolved millions of years ago to help us survive. And these come with difficult trade-offs. Because conflict involves emotions and competing interests, conflict is difficult to deal with, and more often than not, it's complicated to resolve. Even though it may not always be possible to avoid conflict completely, it is important that we're able to recognize common causes of workplace conflict so that we can stifle them early on. The number one cause of conflict in any institution, workplace setting, and pretty much in any relationship is poor communication. That is the number one cause of conflict. And the modern world has actually exacerbated this issue because we tend, especially in a business context, we tend to communicate differently. We communicate electronically with people now. We communicate via emails and WhatsApps. And because we don't use those platforms effectively, it results in poor communication. Also, oftentimes what we say on those platforms is interpreted badly as a bad way of how we said it. Poor communication, the number one cause of conflict. We also have personality differences. There's the idea of unclear job expectations. Resistance to change can cause conflict, but you all know how to manage change now, so that's off the table. There's unfairness or the perception of unfairness. There's the age-old office romance that can cause conflict. And then we have those in power who are challenged by those who are not in power. All of these can create some form of conflict in a workplace environment. And a combination of the above actually can build towards a very toxic working environment. When you have a conflict, that means that there are truths that must be addressed on each side of that conflict. And to resolve that, your job as a manager, your job as a leader is to get people on both sides of the conflict involved so they can have a dialogue. I want to take a moment to read you a letter. And it goes like this. Dear Help Me, I've been married for 10 years and things were good until a couple of years ago. That's when my husband stopped wanting to be intimate. Well, last night I discovered that for the past few months, he's been secretly having long, late night phone calls with a woman at his office. I Googled her and she's gorgeous. I can't believe this is happening. My father had an affair with a coworker when I was young and it broke our family apart. Needless to say, I'm devastated. If I stay in this marriage, I'll never be able to trust my husband again. But I also don't want to put my kids through a divorce, a step-parent situation, etc. What should I do? Well, what should she do? What kind of man do you think her husband is? You see, we all have a story to tell, but there is a problem with the stories that we tell about our lives, because at the end of the day, we are ridiculously unreliable narrators of our own lives. I am, you are, and so is everyone that you know. And I don't mean that we go about purposely misleading people. There are those that do, but most of what people tell us is absolutely true. It's just from their current point of view. Depending on what you emphasize or minimize, what you leave in or leave out, what we see and what you want me to see, we all tell stories in a particular way, and we all tell them from a very particular perspective. Why did we make certain choices? Why did things go wrong? Why we treated someone a certain way? Because obviously they deserved it. Why did someone treat us in a certain way, even though obviously we didn't? You see, stories are the way we make sense of our lives. The woman who wrote that letter, she feels trapped. If she stays with her husband, she feels she can never trust him again. But if she leaves, her children are going to suffer. We all become trapped in the stories that we tell about our lives. We are scared to take responsibility for our role in the story. Because if we take responsibility for our role, we might just have to change. In our stories, we often say, I want change to happen. But when we say that, what we often mean is, I want another character in my story to change. If we can learn to write our story from another character's perspective, we might just start to understand the underlying source of our conflicts. Think about this for a moment. What would happen if you looked at your story and wrote it from another person's point of view? I want to read you another letter, and it goes like this. Dear help me. I need help with my wife. Lately, everything I do irritates her, even the small things, like the noise I make when I chew. At breakfast, I notice she even tries to secretly put extra milk in my cereal so it won't be as crunchy. I feel she became critical of me after my father died 2 years ago. I was very close with him, and her father left when she was young, so she can't relate to what I'm going through. There's a friend at work whose father died a few months ago and who understands my grief. I wish I could talk to my wife the way I talk to my friend, but I feel she barely tolerates me now. I am desperately in love with my wife. Please help me get her back. You see, what we have here are exactly the same stories told from two different perspectives. What do you think of the husband right now? To resolve conflict, everyone must want to work it out. And it's critical that as a leader, you give them the opportunity to do that. They did research the other day, and they discovered globally amongst management and leadership, there is an epidemic of conflict avoidance. 70% of managers avoid conflict. 70% of managers do not address an issue when they see it. It's important that as leaders, we are not threatened by conflict. We need to instead, we have to learn to manage it. Constructive conflict can help build better and a more supportive workplace. It can be an opportunity to repair and strengthen relationships. And it's an opportunity to remove malignant ones. If you ignore conflict, frustration is going to set in. Communication is going to constrict and tension is going to rise. And when that happens, trust evaporates and collaboration is done. We have evolved to survive. The problem is that our society and our lifestyle have evolved so much faster than our brains. And as a result, we generally struggle with difficult conversations because we are fighting modern day battles with prehistoric tools. We need to change the way we see conflict. It's not conflict that's the actual problem. Conflict is natural. It's how we deal with it that creates the long-lasting effects. And there's a process that we need to learn. Dealing with conflict is a skill. It's not something we naturally have. It is something we need to learn to understand, and we need to practice it. And the more we practice it, the better we're going to become at having those difficult conversations. Start with recognizing what the conflict is actually about and show a genuine desire to understand it. Why is this conflict there? And let me understand what is happening. What are the varying perspectives? I mean, you know the age-old saying, there are always three sides to the story. There's your side, there's my side, and then there's the truth. It's important that we're able to recognize when we become stuck in our own justification. As humans, we get stuck in the feeling of being right. And this feeling of being right has a lot to do with the feeling of being wrong, because being wrong is humiliating. It makes us feel uncomfortable, but it can also be a revelation. When we're presented with someone else's argument, we are very adept. We are so good at spotting the weaknesses in their argument. But the positions that we are blind to are actually our own. Being able to say, maybe I'm wrong. This can cause us to trigger our curiosity, and it causes us to think more deeply about things. And then most importantly, we need to learn to communicate responsibly. Practice that art of communication. Leading a tough conversation comes down to 4 stages. The first one, learn to move towards the conflict and acknowledge responsibility. Most of us don't like conflict, but it's normal, it's healthy, and it's totally human. Without conflict, problems are going to hide everywhere. Big problems. Problems we all want to solve. You see, the thing with conflict is to recognize it as information. And if it's handled well, conflict can actually become an opportunity. Rather than running from it or pretending it doesn't exist, we need to learn to move towards it. And in that process, learn to acknowledge your responsibility up front. If you open up a conversation by acknowledging your responsibility, you can actually diffuse the emotions. And in a way, you start by leveling the playing field of that conversation. I've noticed there's an issue lately, and I understand that because I've done this, it may have exacerbated the problem. Immediately, you have owned up to having a responsibility in that problem. And as leaders in management, we have a responsibility in every conflict. And our responsibility becomes bigger the longer we leave it unresolved. Move toward the conflict and acknowledge responsibility. Secondly, when you have a conversation, have a clear and defined outcome. Ensure that you maintain focus on the goal throughout that conversation. You see, the tougher conversations are, the more helter-skelter that journey becomes. It's important that we keep on bringing that conversation back to what the goal is. This is the issue. This is what we need to fix. Have a clear and defined outcome. Thirdly, listen. You don't know everything. And even if you do, it's important to pretend that you don't. Listening is not an act of hearing the words that are being spoken. Listening is an act of understanding the meaning behind those words. It's the act of understanding the feelings behind those words. When we are listening, suspend your judgment and replace it with curiosity, and give people the opportunity to empty their buckets. Let them say what they need to say. Don't interrupt, and don't give your opinion in the process. They need that opportunity to empty their buckets, because it's in that process that important things will be said. And the better you're listening, the better people having the conversation will listen to each other. And this takes a tremendous amount of emotional intelligence. I'll tell you a story about Dia Khan. Now, when Dia Khan was 6 years old, her father took her to her very first anti-racism rally. He was a Pakistani immigrant from Norway, and he promised her at the time that things would get better, that the skinhead gangs that terrorized their family and families like them would soon find themselves relics of past prejudices, that bigotry belonged in history, and that tomorrow would be a more tolerant time. We're 3 decades on from when Dia Khan had that conversation with her father, and she's still waiting for tomorrow. Dia Khan is now an American Muslim filmmaker, and she's an activist who recently made a documentary called White Right, Meeting with the Enemy. I think it's on Netflix. If you have an opportunity, watch it. But the simple premise of her story is that after receiving hate mail and death threats when she gave a BBC TV interview, Dia decided to take a new approach to what she was doing. She decided to see if she could sit down with people like this and document her journey. And this is what she did. She documented her journey in conversation with America's most hardened white supremacists and neo-Nazis. She sat face to face with people who hated everything she stood for and everything she was. And the key to Dia's journey was she allowed them to speak. She suspended her judgment and she displayed curiosity. Dia Khan allowed them to empty their buckets. This feeling of being heard slowly started to build trust. She listened to their stories, and they in turn started to listen to hers. And slowly they realized that they actually could not reconcile the fact that their beliefs conflicted so badly with a person that they'd not only grown to like, but they trusted. And this caused a shift in the zeitgeist. Dia has actually ended up building lifelong friendships with many of those she met in her conversations. And many of them have slowly dropped out of the organizations and movements that they so vehemently defended. Winston Churchill said it best: courage is what it takes to stand up and speak, but courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. That story of Dia Khan highlights the importance in any conflict resolution of listening. You don't know anything, and if you do, pretend you don't. And finally, keep quiet. Don't panic in the few seconds that it takes people to respond. We are so uncomfortable with silence. Whenever there's that moment's silence, we feel we have to fill it with something to say. Sometimes people just need time. If you're jumpy about the pauses, they're going to see that and they're going to lose confidence in this conversation. Some of the best breakthroughs emerge out of a brief period of silence. Don't rush in to rescue the conversation. Don't rush in to rescue everyone from that awkward moment. It's your job to show them that that moment is okay. And then finally, sometimes you just have to screen out the dysfunction. There are conflicts that are caused by people who are bullies. There are conflicts that are caused by people who may be ultimately incompetent. Sometimes we cannot resolve those issues. Regardless of what you do, some environments don't match some people. And it's nobody's fault. It just is what it is. It's like a marriage. Sometimes it is better if both parties, without burning bridges, just go on their own way. Conflict can be a source of inspiration, enlightenment, and learning. It can also be a source of transformation. But we need to be careful when we deal with conflict, because it is an intense source of rage, fear, shame, and resistance. Conversations create the future. Whether we have them or not, and how we have them is entirely up to us. But what we need to learn to do is find common ground and just move forward. Because at the end of the day, one conversation can change everything. I found a really good article the other day, which I've put together. It's called How to Resolve Interpersonal Conflicts in the Workplace: Successful Approaches to Conflict That Strengthen Your Business. And it's by a woman called Liz Kislick. I am also going to send that through to Charles, along with the note summaries and Stephen Rogelberg's interview information. So you've got a nice repository of resources to take away with you from today's session and spend this evening reading up all about it. And I want to end off today talking about the journey that you're on at the moment. And I'll start off by talking about a friend of my wife's. In 2010, Tamsin graduated from university with a BA degree. And she chose the BA degree because when she finished school, she felt that this is the thing that everyone did. She had no direction in her life. And when she completed her BA degree, she had no idea what to do with her life. At the time, she was working an entry-level job. And during that process, she finally knew what her thing was going to be. She wanted to study psychology. She wanted to become a psychologist. She enrolled with UNISA to study part-time for her second degree, this time in psychology. By the time 2016 rolled around, she was well into her honors year, and she was struggling with a particular topic. It was a research module called data analytics. Now, maths and computers were never Tamsin's strong point. She was one of those students where teachers always said, maths is not her thing. Searching the internet for help, she discovered various short learning programs on a variety of platforms, and she started engaging in these to get this help for data analytics. 1 year later, 7 short courses under her belt, Tamsin not only understood data analytics, she realized she was damn good at it. But better yet, she actually enjoyed it. You see, this was actually her thing. not psychology. Tamsin is now 33 years old. And while she travels the world, she works remotely as a data analyst for one of the top marketing solution companies in South Africa. She's earning twice what her peers who graduated with her earn. Currently, she's in a cabin in the Australian outback. This is not only her home and office, but this is her classroom, because she continues to build on the knowledge, insights, and skills that her formal education never provided. This is the story of a girl who still has no idea what to do with her life. But you know what? This no longer scares her. And the point is that as much as top performing organizations recognize the importance of training their people and providing the right skills, we cannot rely on this for our individual growth and success. This is an era of do-it-yourself career development. These platforms like today are great in that they can give us insights we never had before. They can give us the opportunity to view challenges and situations from a different perspective. But the thing is, the pace of change and disruption is unknowingly leaving employees with skill gaps. It's leaving them with blind spots that can and often do derail their careers, as well as organizational effectiveness. Leadership and management are just too difficult to do alone. They're too difficult to learn quickly. And the business we find ourselves in today is too dynamic to continue to use old methods and approaches. To remain relevant, every one of us has to keep on learning. We have to keep on looking for new ways to solve problems, to build our teams, and extract value. I was wondering earlier during our break, looking at all of the delegates on this webinar today, and I was wondering if you guys are building a culture or have a culture of sharing insights with each other from your various organizations. It's something that we've tried to achieve in a program we've put together specifically focused at school leadership and educators. It's called a management and development program in a school context. And as much as it's focused on doing what we were trying to achieve today on this webinar, the most important aspect is to bring together school leaders and educators from different schools and give them a platform to share ideas. There's this culture in schools that has built up in recent years of intense competition. I look at schools around us in the Durban area especially, and there's an animosity amongst the leadership in schools. Glenwood hate DHS and DHS hate Northwood and it makes the leadership journey an incredibly lonely one. We need to learn that as leaders, we're all trying to achieve the same objective. It's important for us to be able to get together and share ideas, share our challenges, and find out ways, what works for you. Maybe I can feed off that. Maybe I can learn something and share something that works for me. Managers, leaders, and employees at all levels have to learn to identify their weaknesses, uncover their blind spots, and strengthen their skills. In Alice in Wonderland, when Alice was asked by the Griffin to share her story, she decided to start with her adventure that morning. And she said at that moment, it's no use going back to yesterday because I was a different person then. Our work preferences and our life preferences do not stay the same. And they don't stay the same for one simple reason, because we don't stay the same. There's the old saying, no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and it's never the same man. And the good news for all of us is it's not too late to start learning new skills. And the reality is it has never been easier to access content. The world revolves around creating value. And the more value you create, the more you will be rewarded, or so the saying goes. Despite the fact that it often misleadingly looks inefficient, some of the most effective learning is informal. It's that learning we do in our own time. It's that video that we watch. It's that conversation we share with a colleague. Because all we need to learn is a little curiosity and some time. If you make the sacrifice, informal learning will change your life, ladies and gentlemen. And all that remains right now is for you to go forth, manage change, face up to and resolve the conflict, and you will boost productivity in your organizations. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your time this morning, and good luck. Just a reminder, if you haven't filled in that registration form yet, the Google form, do it before you log off today. Right now, click on the link if you haven't done it, fill in that form. I will be sending through a summary of the important points that I made today through change management, conflict resolution, and productivity. And I'll also send you those 2 articles, the one from Liz Kislik on resolving personal workplace conflict. It's quite a long read, but you've got lots of time to do it. And that article on managing better meetings. So I hope you've enjoyed today's session. I hope you walk away from here just understanding these 3 key drivers in an organization's success a little better, and you feel a little more comfortable tackling these initiatives. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, are there any final comments, any questions?
Thank you so much, Roger. It was absolutely amazing. I think we can all walk away with a lot of thoughts and a lot of things to ponder on. Guys, yeah, as Roger said, there is going to be 2 forms in the chat box now. The one is for the guys that haven't registered yet. Please, if you do not register, we're not going to know you there, and we're not going to know that you attended this webinar. So please, 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 please fill in that form. And the other one is a feedback form. We always value your feedback. It would be great if you guys can fill that in for us, so that we can have that. I would love that, please, if you can do that. And yes, we'll share the notes and the articles with you guys shortly. And thank you so much for attending today. And awesome. Thank you, Roger, once again.
I just had a little smile because I'm looking at the pictures here and I see Jaco Teron sitting there. And I'm reminded of that. I think it's a car advert on TV where the guy is on a Zoom call in his office and he says he's got a background, but he's actually on at some adventure resort or whatever. So I'm looking at your background there, Jaco, and I'm wondering, is that a background you've chosen, or are you actually on holiday there?
So no, that's our 13th hole year at Desalza. So I just thought
that is a cracking background.
Something nice in there.
I love that. Where is that? Where are you based?
Desalza Golf Club.
Lovely. Sure. Folks, thank you so much for joining. There's just so many of you on here. I can't speak to all of you, but Chantel, Monica, Tabang, Robert, Melissa, Hendrika, Anko, Lungile, thank you so much. I hope you go away today taking some value from this webinar and thinking differently about your roles as supervisors, managers, and leaders. And yeah, take it away to build more productive and happy organizations. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. And I think we should also just maybe thank GolfRSA for sponsoring this webinar for us. Great initiative from them.
Absolutely.
Thank you, GolfRSA.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good one. Shaul?
Roger.
Do you want me to, what I'll do is I'll send through the notes and